For those of you who don't know me, I'm Annie Everall, one of the directors for Authors Aloud UK, and the other director is Naomi Cooper, who's over there and will give you a wave. Can I also introduce Chloe Parkinson from Penguin Random House, and I think Ellen Grady from Penguin Random House has snuck in as well, and they published this wonderful book, which if you haven't read, you need to read it before Christmas because it's just wonderful. Welcome to the launch of the paperback of The Miracle on Ebenezer Street with our lovely author, Catherine Doyle. The shape of tonight's event, the same as our book launch events. Catherine and I will be chatting about the book, and if you have questions or you have comments during the event, please feel free to pop them in the chat box, and Kat will answer your questions when we come to the end of our session. Just to remind you that you can order a signed book-plated copy of The Miracle on Ebenezer Street from H&H Spalding Books, and Naomi will pop the order line into the chat box so that you've got that. Can I ask you now to make sure that all your mics and cameras are now off, and I will introduce Catherine to you. Catherine Doyle grew up in the west of Ireland. She holds a first-class BA in psychology and a first-class MA in publishing. She's the author of the young adult Blood for Blood trilogy, which is often described as Romeo and Juliet meets The Godfather, which I think is a wonderful description of a brilliant trilogy. And it was inspired by her love of modern cinema. She's also the author of the fantastic Stormkeeper trilogy, which are adventure stories about family, about bravery, and about self-discovery. Tonight, though, we're here to celebrate the publication of the paperback of what I think is a really special book, The Miracle on Ebenezer Street, which is, as I said, published by Puffin. And it's a modern reimagining of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And I first read it when the hardback came out at the end of last year, and it grabbed a piece of my heart, and I haven't lost that, and rereading it in preparation for tonight, it's still there. It's still as powerful as it was when I first read it. And I just wanted to share with you a couple of reviews of the book. Emma, when the hardback came out, said, "I love Christmas. It truly is a magical time of the year, but we're living in 2020. And who knows what Christmas 2020 is going to be like for most of us. The COVID-19 pandemic is not going away anytime soon. So how do we find that Christmas cheer in our hearts this year? One suggestion of mine is through books. Escaping the horrors of 2020 into the pages of a tinsel-trimmed story. And what better type of story is there than a beautiful children's story? The Miracle on Ebenezer Street may be written and marketed towards those in the middle grade category, and it's just perfect for this age group. But this book has so much more magic in its pages that it would be sad if people of any age didn't get to enjoy it. It's a modern spin on the classic Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and a spin in a way you won't predict." And Angela says about the book, "Highly recommended for children aged 8 to 12-ish, I would say, and all adults that still believe. If Christmas is still in your heart and you read a chapter a night leading up to Christmas Eve, who knows what miracles might happen to you?" Well, I still believe. So I'm really looking forward to the miracle and the magic from the book coming from you, Kat. So maybe we could start by me asking you to tell our audience a little bit about your background and how you got into writing.
Sure. Well, I've always loved stories, ever since I was really small. One of my favorite things to do would be to go to the library every week with my mom and pick out a new book and bring it home and sort of read it. So I definitely grew up in a house that kind of valued stories and imagination. You know, I wrote to the Tooth Fairy, and the Tooth Fairy always wrote back. So that sense of kind of magic and possibility, I suppose, is kind of deeply ingrained within me even now. But I didn't really think it was a viable, I suppose, option or career option to do as I grew up, especially in my teenage years and into college. Um, Even though I always loved writing. And then when I had finished my degree in psychology, I was at a loss as to what I wanted to do kind of going forward. And it was around that time that my mom kind of basically tricked me into accompanying her to a creative writing course that she had no interest in actually attending. But she said, "Oh, Catherine, I really want to learn how to write. Will you come with me?" So I went as a favor to her, and you know, that experience of getting to write my own stories and read them out to people and get that positive reinforcement really planted a seed in me. And I kind of thought, maybe I will give this a go. Maybe I will try and be a writer. And after about 8 weeks of that course, my mom was like, "I knew it. I got you there." So it was after that really that I kind of sat down and wrote my first book, which became Vendetta, my first YA novel that was published about 8 or 9 years ago now. So there was no stopping me after that, really.
Good. We don't want you to stop. So tell us what Miracle on Ebenezer is about, and also what made you want to write it.
Well, as you know, I love Christmas. Like, I'm one of those people that would keep my tree up all year round if it didn't, you know, go brown and die and sort of splinter all over my floor. So I've always loved Christmas. It's my favorite time of year. Once November hits, I'm there. I'm in the zone right up until like the end of January. And one of the things that I love about Christmas is the kind of this tradition that I would always have in my house, where we would read a Christmas carol kind of every year. It was like our Christmas book, you know, everyone kind of has their Christmas book. And shortly after Stormkeeper was published, my other middle grade trilogy, Penguin actually reached out to me and said, you know, we're looking for someone to do a kind of a modern retelling of A Christmas Carol, and we think that you might be a good fit because of the way you write modern magic. And they said, "Do you want to do it?" I was like, "Yes, I will pay you to let me do this." Like, it was just like, it felt to me like the most perfect opportunity in the world. Like, I almost wished it into existence. So I said yes so quickly that I didn't think about like what I was going to write or how I was going to modernize this, you know, incredibly famous classic book that millions and millions of people across the world love. So I said yes, and I was so excited for about a week. And then when I had to sit down and make the plan, I immediately was like, you know, this kind of panic set in. So what I knew that I wanted to do is keep kind of a lot of classic references to the original and make sure that anyone who reads the original will recognize it in my work. But I wanted to make it 21st century, very modern kind of, and then, I mean, a little bit more mischievous, a little bit much like less scary maybe, and just really new, like really kind of a really fresh take. And so what I ended up with was The Miracle on Ebenezer Street, which is essentially the story of a 10-year-old boy called George Bishop, whose father, Hugo Bishop, has cancelled Christmas because 3 years ago, George's mother passed away on Christmas Eve. And so ever since then, his father just absolutely can't handle anything to do with Christmas or festivities. So, you know, no tree, no Christmas pudding, no bread, like nothing, no cinnamon. He's very strict about it. And so the book opens with George kind of really wishing that he could get Christmas back into his life so they can kind of move on and make the best of everything. And so fortunately, George has, you know, a very mischievous granny who is very much young at heart and still believes in magic. And she takes him into Winter Wonderland at Hyde Park. And it's there that George finds a little cabin called Marley's Christmas Curiosities that sells sort of magical trinkets. And he finds this snow globe that contains like a scene from his past. And it's this snow globe that becomes almost like the magical wand that casts him and his father into 3 very different settings, one from Christmas past, one from Christmas present, and then one from Christmas future. And it's that journey that George kind of drags his father on. His nan comes along very willingly, obviously. She loves an adventure. And it's over the course of those 3 journeys that Hugo, who's sort of the modern Scrooge-like character in this story, begins to think, or rather change his ways and kind of reinvest in the magic of Christmas and what it's worth. I think that's a pretty good
That's a really great summary of it. And as you say, a Christmas Carol is a classic story known by millions. How scary was it having, sort of trying to write a modern reworking of something so famous?
It was terrifying because you don't want to be too similar to the original, because then you'll be compared to the original and inevitably you won't be as good because the original is the original. But what was kind of encouraging is there's so many incredible remakes of A Christmas Carol, like Scrooged, and my personal favorite, A Muppet's Christmas Carol, which was so affecting. Like for me, I genuinely thought there were two Marleys in the text, for years, because of that Marley and Marley song that they do in the movie. So I kind of thought, okay, it's been done before in loads of different ways. I just have to find a way to do it in a way that's really kind of plays to my strengths and plays to what I think is important in like modern children's books. But it was definitely the first few weeks where I was treading very carefully. And then when I would write certain characters like Marley, the new version of Marley, and this kind of enigmatic shopkeeper who's clearly magical and is watching over this whole journey, I loved writing him. I found his voice immediately, and it was fresh and new, and it was really exciting. And then George's granny. And as these kind of characters came up in my writing, it felt really like my own and really fun and exciting to write. And I knew once I got that kind of feeling of momentum, and like I'd be laughing sometimes, like writing a scene and really just enjoying myself, I thought, okay, well, if I can enjoy myself writing it, usually, hopefully that means that when it comes time to read it, the reader will also hopefully feel some of that enjoyment as well.
Yeah, I mean it's we'll talk about characters in a while, but there is an amazing array of characters that you really do believe in. And one of the things that struck me reading it, I mean, obviously A Christmas Carol set in Victorian times. How did you approach keeping that feel? Because that Victorian feel does come through quite strongly, but setting your story in the modern world, and how hard was it to do that?
That's a really good question. And that was probably the hardest, by far and away for me, the hardest thing was keeping that Victorian feel, because, well, one, I'm Irish, so a lot of my historical and cultural references, have nothing to do with Victorian London. But it's so important to the book, that sense of history and culture, that I absolutely wanted to make sure that I was paying homage to it in the right way. So I went back and I read A Christmas Carol about, I'd say 3 times in a row. I just read it on repeat until I literally felt like I was living in that Victorian era. I kind of soaked myself in that kind of culture, that kind of vibe, if you will. And then I made a really keen effort to try and bring it through in little bits and pieces throughout the book. But that was the thing that I was most keen to get right, and probably most worried about starting out. So I'm glad that it worked.
It did, yeah, it did, and it works quite seamlessly. For me, it works quite seamlessly. I really like the way it blended. So, and the other thing that I really love about the book is the way the magic works in the story. So, what made you decide to use the snow globe as a device for setting the magic free, and where did the idea of Marley's curiosity shop come from?
That's a good question. So I wanted there to be a physical object that enacted the magic, because I just think as a reader, I think it's cooler. I think it's easier to visualize. And with Christmas, I mean, if you think about all the Christmas decorations you put up in your house, there's so many different directions that you can go with a shiny item, basically. But what was unique about the snow globe is, because I wanted the snow globe to contain a scene from George's past, from beyond 3 years ago, it was the perfect ornament, really, because that's the whole nature of snow globes. And I don't know if you know much about the snow globe industry, but I got pretty deep into it. And there are, a lot of different kinds. You can do a lot with a snow globe or a sun globe. And I thought, oh, that's so beautiful and visual that a snow globe can contain anything from like the cityscape of New York to, a single father and his son walking to the shop on a snowy day. And I thought it would be a really fun thing visually to play with. And then the Marley's Christmas Curiosity Shop, that was, I think, one of the first things that came to me, because I absolutely love I just kept coming up with all these other ideas for magical Christmas items that didn't have a main character role in the story, but I really wanted to feature them to give this sense that George isn't the only kid that gets to happen upon magic at Christmas. You know, there's a place that you can go if you need help, or if you need someone, where you can maybe find a magical trinket that will help you figure out your own Christmas woe, if you will. So I sat down and I started writing this magical cabin full of magical trinkets. And once I was writing that scene, I thought, this feels really fun and really magical. And then the trick was, how do I feature this heavily throughout the steps without taking away from the plot? How do I keep bringing Marley back into it, but not in a way where he bulldozes through a scene? So yeah, the snow globe basically had to come from somewhere, and the place that it came from, I wanted it to represent a shop that would be for hundreds of children or thousands of children. It's not just George and his story.
And it is that, the thing that as a reader, I think you keep thinking about is the shop, and, all the different things that are in that shop. And I think for kids, it takes them on that journey of thinking, well, what would I choose if I was in that shop? For me, I'll let you into a secret. It would be the snow globe. I absolutely adore, have a little collection of snow globes. So it really is an instrument of magic. So at that point, do you think we could ask you to do a reading from the book, give people a taste of it?
So this, I've been doing a few kind of local school events in the last couple of weeks, and this reading comes highly requested. So I'm going to do some voices, so I can only apologize in advance. I'll just situate it very quickly. This is at the start of George's journey to Christmas Present, and he gets a visit basically from my version of the Ghost of Christmas Present, which is an elf on the shelf come to life. And if you've ever seen an elf on the shelf, you'll know how creepy they look. So, all right, here we go. Chapter 13, The Elf on the Shelf. At 6:34 a.m. on Christmas morning, there was a knock at Hugo Bishop's bedroom door. Rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat. The door creaked open. Ahoy hoy, came a small, tinny voice. Did someone order a miracle? George's father leapt up onto the mattress. Get up, George, quickly, he said, wobbling a little on his feet. There's an intruder. George's bleary eyes were trained on the swinging door, but he couldn't see anyone coming through it. He clambered up after his father, dimly aware of the heat flaring in his pocket, the snow globe. Dad, Shh! I think we're being burgled. The door slammed shut, the reverberating bang replaced by the pitter-patter of tiny footsteps. George and his father stared down, their eyes suddenly growing very wide. There was an elf strolling across the floor. She appeared to be made of wood and was wearing a stripy red and green onesie with a matching green hat. George recognized her from one of the shelves at Marley's Christmas Curiosities. She paused to look up at them. Sorry I'm late. I was inanimate. George's father started screaming. George, who was suddenly wide awake, grabbed him by the shoulders. Calm down, Dad. It's just the miracle. Sit down. Breathe. Hugo Bishop sank onto his pillow. What have you done, George? He said with terror. My heart won't survive this. Not by a long shot. Relax, Dad, said George, sinking down after him. She's tiny. I don't care. She shouldn't be here, rasped George's father. Actually, I'm tall for my species, the elf piped up. Which is, said George curiously. Festive puppetry. They watched as the elf strolled all the way to the end of the bed, where she promptly began to climb his father's bookcase. She slipped several times, only to catch herself with her spindly arms at the last second. Don't mind me, she huffed. I like to sit on a shelf wherever possible. She paused halfway up to catch her breath, grinning at them over her shoulder. And then I just watch people for hours, days, weeks, if time allows. It's my very favorite thing to do. She resumed her climb, this time using her knobbly knees to shimmy towards the highest shelf. Come on, Trixie, you can do this. Work with the shelf. Think like the shelf. Become the shelf. Concentrate. That's it. Concentrate. George's father scooted closer to him. George, he hissed. If we make a run for it. No way, George interrupted him. The elf, or Trixie as she appeared to be called, swung a floppy leg over the top of the bookcase, and heaved herself up after it, her face grinding against the wood. "That's gonna hurt tomorrow," she groaned. "Might even need a new coat of varnish." "What if she murders us?" whispered George's father. "Just look at that smile. It hasn't so much as twitched. Why does it have to be so wide, George? It's not natural." "Well, of course it's not natural. It's not supposed to be," said George. "And she's not going to murder us, Dad. She's made of wood. Plus, do you see a weapon anywhere?" "She might have something in her hat, George." George rolled his eyes. "She does not have something in her hat." "That reminds me," said Trixie. "I have something in my hat." "Ah!" bellowed George's father. "I knew it, you creepy-faced cretin. Try anything and you'll be firewood by dawn." Trixie looked over at George. "Is he always like this?" "Unfortunately, yes," said George. "Well, we should probably get going." "To where?" said George, sitting up straighter. "No," said his father flatly. "We are not going anywhere with you." "What if I say please?" said Trixie sweetly. "No." "All right then," she said, swinging her legs back and forth. "What if I say, actually, Hugo, this is all just a formality. There's magic stronger than your foulest mood at work here, and as it happens, you have no choice in the matter of your impending adventure and will be coming with me whether you like it or not." George's father snorted. "And how exactly does an elf no bigger than a baguette plan on bringing me anywhere against my will?" Trixie giggled into her tiny wooden hand. "Oh, silly me! I forgot! I brought a friend with me." Who on earth? The rest of Hugo's question was lost in an almighty crash. George whipped his head around just in time to see the bedroom door blow back on its hinges. The walls shuddered. The drawers rattled in their dresser. A hulking shadow filled up the door frame, strange branches of silver glinting at them in the duskiness. George scrabbled backwards across the mattress. Trixie waved excitedly. "Everyone, this is my close friend and personal confidant, Randolph. Randolph, this is George Bishop, requester of the miracle. The man currently clinging to the bedpost is the subject of the miracle, George's father, Hugo. It looks like we have a mid-level Scrooge on our hands, but it's nothing we can't handle. Come on in and say hello." The shadow thundered through the doorway, taking half of it with him. He skidded to a stop at the edge of the bed frame and dipped his mammoth head in greeting. The tip of his silver antler nearly took George's eye out. George's breath whooshed out of him. Is he? It looks like, it's a purple reindeer," shouted his father, who was now pressed against his bedroom window as far from the animal as he could possibly get. The bedside lamp spilled light across the room, illuminating Randolph in all his violet glory. "Get away from it, son, before it eats you!" There you go. A little bit of Christmas silliness.
Myself. I love that, and that's the other thing about the story. I think that you've got your main characters, but you've got a really fantastic array of characters, and even the magical ones like Trixie and Randolph. They've kind of got personalities and lives of their own within the story. And they all develop really well. But I have to say that I irrevocably fell in love with Nana Flo. I just thought she was the most amazing character. There's a kind of luminous, magical quality to her. She smashes all the stereotypes of grandmothers. So is she based on your own granny?
Yes, one of the themes with all my middle grade books is I usually like to put one of my grandparents in the book and slightly change them, but definitely pay homage to them. And so for this one, Nana Flo is based on my Nana Jo, who is 95 years old, left school at 14, raised 8 children, was a soul care for my uncle who has Down syndrome for over 60 years and is still full of kind of life and wit and humor and this kind of inimitable warmth. And when I came to kind of crafting Nana Flo, I wanted George to really feel like he had an ally in this kind of fight to bring Christmas home. And what I really like about my grandparents, and what I think is true of many grandparents actually, is they retain this incredible sense of whimsy that they often kind of bring to their grandchildren, and that can often be a thing that bonds them. And so with George, you know, the magic of Nana Flo is she's never stopped believing in magic, and to her anything is possible, and you just have to kind of put a little grit into it. So she's always up for an adventure, and always kind of has a wise word or a funny word depending on what the situation calls for. And that's very much like what my Nana Jo is like. So and she's physically looks exactly like my Nana as well. So I said, Nana, I put you in a book. She was like, oh, that's nice. So yes, that's definitely probably why people like her so much, is because she's very real, because she is literally a real person.
Yeah. And she does, doesn't she? She leads the charge into the magic headlong. You know, nothing phases her, which is brilliant.
Exactly. Well, I mean, you know, what's kind of was really fun to write about Nana Flo is in Marley's Christmas Curiosity Shop, there is a sign, and the sign says strictly no grown-ups allowed. Enter at your own whimsy. And so for the majority of the book, only children get to go into this curiosity shop. But Nana Flo is kind of the exception, because she is young at heart. So that rule doesn't really apply to her, because you're, as they say, you're as young as you feel. And, you know, she's very much this kind of, the spirit of Christmas has never left her.
And actually throughout the book as well, I mean, there are several kind of homage elements to, you know, Dickens and to A Christmas Carol. So you've got Pickwick Place, you've got Cratchit Close, you've got Great Expectations Bookshop, which I think is a fantastic name for a bookshop.
Yeah.
Did you have fun making those up?
Oh my gosh, the most fun. I everything, and then even Bell Farm, anything. I wanted to take as many Easter eggs as possible and put them in, because obviously some children reading this book won't be familiar with A Christmas Carol potentially, or they might not understand it. But a lot of children and adults who read it, or adults who read it to their children or in school or whatever, will recognize these Easter eggs. And as a reader, I love when that happens. Yeah. So I thought, okay, how many ways can I get little side notes and like wink, wink references in? And it was really a lot of fun going through A Christmas. I like mined all the kind of content from A Christmas Carol, and then had to like thread it through in a way that was seamless but noticeable to those who kind of knew what to look for.
Yeah. And as we've talked already, there is a lot of humour in the book through situations, through characters, through descriptions. But it is actually also about families and dealing with grief. And I found when I was reading it, actually both times, that I was laughing out loud one minute and on the edge of tears, the next. Was it important to you to make sure that humour was included as a balance to the sadness of the grief? And kind of how do you as a writer ensure that you achieve that balance, particularly when you're working within the context of a Victorian style novel and a modern reimagining?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of sadness in there. That's why Hugo is the way he is. He's a very human Scrooge. You can really track his journey and why he doesn't like Christmas, and why he's kind of trapped in like a prison of his own grief.
Yeah.
And George too is, the grief is not as fresh for him, but it's a lingering sadness that's kind of around him. But I didn't want it to be too indulgent in the sadness. It's very difficult I find, to plow through a book that doesn't have humor or hope as well.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know if it's about, maybe it's being Irish, or maybe it was the way I was raised, but I think you can have the two existing side by side, a bit of humor and a bit of sadness. And kind of sometimes a good way to deal with sadness is through humor. Yeah. That's kind of my natural approach to life. So with this, and like when I went for humor, there are parts that are really humorous, and a little bit silly and whimsical. And there are other parts that are kind of very sad and serious. And I wanted George to be able to experience both, like a normal child would, or a normal adult. It's really important to me always to have hope and humor in anything that I write, in any genre, because it's what I look for as a reader, and I think it's important. And then in terms of kind of like balancing it as I was writing it, a good telltale trick for me is if I'm writing a scene that feels sad, I usually will feel that urge to cry, like just quite indulgent when it's your own work. But I get there, I get that pain in my heart, and I'm like, ooh, like I can feel when something is sad, but similarly, I can feel when something is really funny to me and I'm like really enjoying it. I'm like, oh, and if I can hit those two emotional points as I'm writing, typically that means that I'm balancing them, with hope quite well. I'm not leaning too far in one direction.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think the balance is really well done, and I think what you've also done is that understanding that comes between George and his father. You know, that they are both dealing with their grief in very different ways. You know, but they have to find a way back to each other, and I really, that really made me think about a lot of things, and how sometimes we judge people by the way they behave, where if we unpick it, there's a lot going on underneath. So I think you did that really well. I don't know if you have a second reading that you'd like to share with them, or whether you'd just like me to carry on with the questions.
I can do, I do have a shorter reading that happens. So when the first, the kind of ghosts part is when George and his father go back to a Christmas past. They're carried by an oil portrait come to life of Hugo's great grandfather Walter Bishop, who is a very foreboding man, and I won't be doing his accent because it's very tricky. But when they're back there, this is basically the moment that Hugo realizes that the thing that's enacting all this magic that is terrifying him is the snow globe in George's fist. So he decides to sort of take matters into his own hands to bring them home again, which is obviously a terrible idea, as I'm sure you can imagine. George turned the snow globe in his hand. Well, that was pointless, he muttered. Dad had remembered, but it hadn't changed anything. Just then, his father swiped the snow globe from him. So this is really how you've been making all this absurdity happen. Well, it stops here and now. He began to shake it violently. Be careful, Dad. Don't break it. I know how a snow globe works, George. It's not rocket science. Now stand back. I'm getting us out of here. He wound his arm round and round like he was about to pitch a baseball. It's getting warmer. I can feel it. George's mother's laughter was eclipsed by a distant rumbling. The ground began to tremble, the trees creaking as they shook the snow from their branches. Dad, said George warningly. What? He said, still shaking. Is it working? In the distance, on top of the tallest hill, a drift of snow had come loose and was sliding down the slope. No, but I think you might be making a bigger problem. Hugo glanced over his shoulder. George snatched the snow globe back and stuffed it into his pocket, but it was already too late. His younger self had disappeared. His parents, too. The snowman remained, its button eyes trained on the accidental avalanche as it thundered towards them. George's father grabbed him by the shoulders and shoved him towards the nearest tree. Quickly, he said, hoisting him onto a low-hanging branch. Get as high as you can and hold on tight. I'll be right behind you. George was halfway up the tree when he heard a high-pitched meow. Coco darted out from a hollow in the bark. George scrambled down after her. Coco! Leave her, George. Our Coco is back at home. But what if she's not? What if she followed us into the painting? George ducked out of his father's grasp and sprinted after his cat. Coco saw him coming, meowed one last time, then bolted straight into the path of the avalanche. Coco, no! George hurried after her, his slippers sticking and sliding in the snow. George, come back here! George's father limped after him. You'll be flattened! In fact, they were all going to be flattened. With a roar like a lion's, the avalanche reared up and leapt over the cat. George screamed as it crashed back down to earth, spitting chunks of grass and snow in its wake. And then it was upon him too, the snow so dense and cold and blinding, George couldn't see the world beyond it, not the sun or the sky or his father, shouting himself hoarse. There was only the end of the world bearing down on him. George shut his eyes and covered his head with his hands as the avalanche swallowed him whole. That one is more dramatic.
And if you want to know what happens, folks, you're going to have to read the book. The one thing, I haven't seen the paperback yet.
Oh, have you not?
Not yet. I've seen the cover, which is beautiful. But one of the things I loved about the hardback were the illustrated chapter headings, and I'm assuming that they still remain in the paperback. And they were done by Pedro Riquelme, weren't they?
That's right.
I felt they really did add to and support your story. Whose idea was that, and how did it work between you as the author and Pedro as the illustrator? Was there any connectivity between you?
So initially we got the cover, which, as you know, is just like the most exciting thing ever.
Yeah.
And Pedro he kind of took the brief of, when I'm sure illustrators get this a lot, but when you hear giant purple reindeer and we want 4 people riding the reindeer, and also can the reindeer be in London, but have London in the background, and also can everything be in a snow globe? I'm sure he was like, okay, that's a lot. So he turned out this beautiful cover, and this illustration I think really captures like the fun and the adventure of the book. And then after that, I think it was an editor at Penguin who said, well, should we do, Pedro's so talented, should we do chapter headings? And I thought, I love when there's a bit of illustration in a kid's book, or any book, to be honest. And so I kind of sat down and had to think about what would make sense. But I tend to title my chapters with what happens in them, like the accidental avalanche or the elf on the shelf, to really situate the reader and make it easy to read them in doses of 1 chapter per day or whatever. So he just kind of got the brief and just came up with his own version of them, and they really matched kind of what I had envisioned or what was in my head. So that's a really cool thing that obviously doesn't always happen, but when it does happen, it can feel a bit like magic that you're on the same page.
Yeah.
So I feel really lucky, to have had him on board.
Yeah. I think he did a brilliant job, and all credit to Puffin really for deciding to go down that route, because I think the story and the illustrations work really well together, which doesn't always happen in a middle grade novel. So let's think then about Marley's Curiosity Shop again, and maybe our audience can be thinking about this. So if you could choose one magical item from Marley's Curiosity Shop, what would you choose and why? And I'm posing that to the audience out there. Pop your thoughts in the chat box too, if you feel so inclined.
I'd be between 2 items. I do love the idea of a snow globe that can take you to a scene from your past. I think the harder thing to think about is, well, what moment or what day from your past would you like to go to, over and over again, if you can only choose one? So I'd probably go back to when I was a child, maybe playing in my first snow, or I guess eating French toast in my grandparents' house, when I was about 5 years old. There was no happier memory. Or there's another item in Marley's Christmas Curiosity Shop that's called a fortune fastener, which is like a special kind of hair accessory. And if you wear the hair accessory, it just brings you untold good luck. So I like the idea of having something a bit more nebulous that just every day of your life can maybe be attracting little pieces of good luck to you as well. I feel like you can get more bang for your buck almost if you do it that way. So I think probably there's other stuff as well. There's on one of the shelves George is looking at, there's like talkative tea bags. So if you're shy, you can have like a cup of tea and then you can get really chatty. Or a melancholic mint, which is if you're feeling sad and you just want to, or have a little weep, one of those weeps, you just get it all out. And then there's something called a belligerent bath bomb, which you just make a bath and then the bath is just really offensive. I had a lot of fun coming up with like the weirdest, quirkiest things, but I think it would be funny to try. Probably I don't need the talkative tea bag. I don't know, I hate to imagine what that would do to me. I'm already quite talkative, but I think it would be kind of fun to try one of those other things just to see.
It is a book, I think, that just sparks all sorts of imagination in the minds of the child reader, and I'm sure that they will come up with lots of other things that could go. That'd be a good competition, wouldn't it? What would you design to go into Marley's Curiosity Shop? So,
right,
there's a challenge for our audience again. What would you design and put in? So, as we've said, the book, as well as being about magic and humour, it is at its heart, it is about families and about dealing with grief, as well as the magic of Christmas. So what are the key messages that you want a child reader to take from the book?
That's a good question. I mean, the first thing, I don't think this is necessarily a message, but something I was really conscious of is I didn't want to demonize the Scrooge character, or like George's father. It was really important for me to make him a very 3-dimensional man who loves his son and is just kind of a little bit sad. So I wanted it to very much be a journey of healing and hope for them, but not in a way that you would ever kind of, I think sometimes in middle grade it's, you can demonize the parents, or there's lots of ways that you can write them, and I wanted him to feel very human throughout, and his journey to feel very human. But for children reading it, hope is the main thing. Hope, and also I think that it's okay to kind of believe in magic and in the whimsical, as you get older. Like, you don't ever have to stop, I suppose, or package away that part of you, because I think it's I just think it's really important, and I think it can serve you later in life as well. And it makes you more of an optimist. And I think, now more than ever, we need to hold on to that optimism and hope. So I think, and I think the importance, as with everything I write, the thing that is most important is, one, the importance of family, and how that kind of trumps everything. And really bringing Christmas back is more, what it really is bringing back the love and kind of bond between father and son.
Yeah.
And paramount to that is the importance of your grandparents. I always say this, like, I feel like I was quite old before I realized how important my grandparents were, how much they had lived and seen, and how wise they were, and what they knew about the world, and about anything from empathy, to adventure. And I think the sooner children, and some kids do get that straight away, but the sooner children realize it, the sooner they can kind of make that bond, and sort of kind of, their grandparents are like treasures, like really rare, special treasures. So I like to always give them a starring role in my stories.
Yeah, no, it's a good message for kids about hope and optimism. So thank you for that. So as an author, what would your top tips for writing be, in case we've got people out there that might be thinking of writing or working with kids who might be writing?
I like to give 3 top tips. My first one I always say is read, like, just read as much as you can, because I really think that you subconsciously absorb so much just by reading. It's like you're practicing without consciously having to practice. And then I always say to children, or adults and children, is you can, if you're struggling with characters, look around at your life, and who are the people that stand out to you the most, who are the people that you think are the funniest or that have the biggest effect on you. And it's okay that you can borrow parts. Maybe it's like your mom's laugh, or like your dad's silly socks. You can borrow parts of the people in your life to help make your own characters feel more authentic. If it's a bad character, don't tell them. If it's a good character, they'll be complimented. So like, be a magpie, I guess, is what I mean when it comes to people in your life. And the third thing I think is, a lot of people, when they start writing, they get to a point inevitably where they think, oh, this is bad and this is a waste of my time. Or they might get to chapter 1, they might get to chapter 10, and they might just be like, I'm not good, this isn't good. And they'll just give up, and they'll put it in a drawer, and maybe they'll never look back. I always say that that's a really normal part of creativity. And in fact, I think truly creative people are racked by self-doubt, and it's going to kind of get you at some point in the journey when it comes to writing. And recognizing that it is your inner voice of self-doubt, and then ignoring it and pushing through is really important. Because everybody I've ever met who writes books has that same voice, and the key is just tell it to shut up and keep going.
Brilliant. Well, let me ask our audience, if you've got questions, can you pop them now into the chat box, and I'll ask one more question and then see if we've had any come in from our audience. So what are you working on now?
So I have just finished up the final edits of a YA book I have coming out next year called Twin Crowns, which is co-written with the author Catherine Weber. And that's about twin sisters separated at birth, one who is raised as a princess and one who is raised as a witch. And at the start of the book, the witch kidnaps the princess and takes her place, with the view to stealing the crown. So it's kind of like a high-stakes Princess Bride romantic fantasy comedy book. And then on the middle grade side of it, my next middle grade standalone adventure is called The Lost Girl King. That's coming out next June, and it's about a sister and a brother who find their way accidentally kind of through this magical waterfall into the land of Chirnanog, or the land of the ever young. And when they get there, they realize that it's not quite all it's cracked up to be. It's actually a little bit cursed, and they're stuck there. So they kind of have to basically rescue themselves and rescue each other, and try and sort of get out. And along the way, they think, well, maybe we should try rescuing this land as well from the clutches of the evil mage who rules over it. So that's a kind of a a general overview.
Sounds great, actually. Sorry, Nicola, she said that question. I just nabbed the question she was going to ask you. So, so sorry. Is there any others that have come in? No, I don't think we've got any other questions. So tell us one fun fact about you that nobody knows.
Oh, a fun fact. I have a fact that people that doesn't. Well, so I am deathly afraid of butterflies.
Really?
It's really debilitating.
Yeah.
Yes, it's really debilitating. I'm very afraid of butterflies. And oh gosh, I don't know. Once, I guess a fun thing that once happened to me is I was scuba diving in an island off the coast of Bali. And I got in like an accidental head-on collision with a giant sea turtle. Yeah. These are the two facts that I usually tell at a school event, and the kids will be like, "You're afraid of butterflies? What, you weirdo?" Oh, it's my secret shame.
Okay, we have Janet says, do you think the book would make a great film?
Yes. Is it? Yeah, we've actually, the film rights have been sold to a production company. With these things, it could take 10 years. But I had a very good reception to the book when we were exploring the kind of the film rights direction. So they do now belong to a really lovely film company who are really enthusiastic about it. But so I would love to see it on screen. I think it's really, really filmic, probably the most filmic thing I've ever written. That would be a dream come true.
Have you kind of any thoughts in your head who you might like to play the central characters in a film?
So I would love, the ages won't match up here at all now, but I would love Colin Firth to be Hugo. I think he'd do a really good job. I love Helena Bonham Carter. I think she'd be a great Nan. She's probably a bit young, but maybe they could like age her up. And I can't say he's an English comedian. It's Richard Is it Ayoade? Richard, he's like I think he's on the IT Crowd. I think he'd do a good Marley. He's really funny and like dry, his humor. But I think Helena Bonham Carter would be amazing.
She would, wouldn't she? Yeah. And I think they could age her well enough to let her do it. So yeah, she would be a great Nana Flo. I agree with you on that one. So
Colin Firth is good at I feel like he's good at doing like grumpy, but also nice and a bit dreamy.
Yeah.
He's good to look at.
Yeah, no, I agree with you on that as well. So fingers crossed, however long it takes, we'll see a film. And what's your favourite Christmas tradition?
Oh, that's a good question. I love the tradition of watching Christmas movies. Like It's a Wonderful Life, The Muppets Christmas Carol. A new tradition that has emerged with the advent of Netflix is I love watching those really corny Christmas. Like I just watched A Castle for Christmas. Highly recommend that on Netflix. It's one of those kind of cornier, easy watching, low stakes Christmas movies. I watch like everything Christmas related every year. Once we get into December on Netflix. So anything that kind of puts me in the zone.
Yeah, me too. I'm with you on the Christmas movies. Actually, Nicola says defo Colin Firth, and she says, and maybe John Lynch for moodiness.
Who's John Lynch?
Actually, I'm not sure. What, Nicola?
What's he in? I bet
John Lynch. What's he in? Oh, he's a Northern Irish actor, apparently.
Okay, John Lynch.
Well, we'll Google him and we'll.
Moody is the vibe.
Secret Garden.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
The Secret Garden.
Moody is the vibe for sure.
Any more questions or comments? I think we might have worked our way through them, actually.
Very thorough.
Yeah, I think we have. So I think at that point, I will. Nicola says she's Northern Irish herself, so she's biased. That's all right, Nicola.
That's good.
You're allowed to be biased.
Yes, absolutely.
So before I bring the event to a close and thank Catherine, just a few things to say. just to remind you that you can order a signed and dedicated copy of the book from Spalding's Books. And seriously, if you haven't had a chance to read it, do, or ask Santa to bring it for you. Just to let you know, if you're interested in our future events, that on Wednesday evening at the same time, we have Beck's band talking about her brilliant new book, 3 Stripes South, which is about her 1,000-kilometer trek across Israel, including through the Negev desert. It's a book for adults and for young people, sort of key stage 4. If you don't want to keep your details on file so that we can let you know about our future events, please email me and I will remove you from the list. So just need to say a few thank yous. Thank you, Penguin Random House, for asking us to host this launch tonight. So thanks, Chloe. And thanks to Naomi for being in the background and making sure that Zoom behaved itself as well it can. Thanks to all of you for coming tonight and for supporting us by booking authors through us and for coming to our events. And finally, a special huge thank you to you, Catherine, for such a brilliant evening and for such a brilliant book. And I've probably told you this before, but when I was about 9, my younger sister came home from school one day and started to tell me about a story that her teacher had been reading to the class. And it was about children who found a magical land through the back of a wardrobe. And I fell in love with the story, and I made my sister tell me the next instalment as soon as she got home every day for school. And when the weekend came, I couldn't wait. So I got my mum to go out and buy me The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Igniting that kind of magic and excitement in the reader is always what we want for children. And reading Miracle on Ebenezer Street, I felt that again when I read it the first time, and again when I read it before this evening. It's the perfect book for teachers to read a chapter a day to their classes in the run-up to Christmas, and for parents to read as a bedtime story. And as Walter says to George in the story, a little bit of magic goes a long way. And this book for me is definitely that little piece of magic, and it will definitely go a long way. So everybody out there, can you raise your glasses and join me in saying congratulations, Kat, and thank you for giving us such a truly wonderful book that I think is already becoming one of the Christmas classics. So cheers, Kat.
Thank you, Annie. That's so lovely.
I do hope everyone has enjoyed tonight, and I hope to see you again at our next event. And thank you, Jane, for your comments, and thank you, Ming, for your comments. Thanks, everyone, for your lovely comments. So take care, stay safe, and if we don't see you at Beck's Band's event next week, have a very happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Take care, bye. And don't forget, if you've got school classes, Kat's doing a schools event with us next Friday. I've forgotten the date now.
So have I. Oh no, I think is it Friday?
Yes, it is the Friday. It's the 10th. It's the 10th. So if you haven't registered your class but you want to, registration is still open. And if you can't find the registration link, just drop me an email and I'll point you in the right direction. Take care. Stay safe. Bye.